and a terrible ink stain on his white shirt put there this morning when he suddenly realized at 2 minutes before the hour that he had to quit writing and get over to the studio to meet with you. It really caught me by surprise. I was writing a story at the Panera Bread store where I docked this morning my computer and my paper spread across the table, my favorite table there on the left. And I was dictating a story into my smartphone, as I often do. And suddenly it was 2 minutes till I hastened out and dropped a black Sharpie without the cap on into my white shirt pocket. This is an old shirt I have. I think I got it secondhand. It's made for a man much larger than me, a man probably the size of Alvin York, and is long just about. It crumples up under my belt. And I dashed over to the studio here in Hickson. At 92.7, the center of the reporting world. And, you know, we and threw let me tell you what happened. I threw my computer onto the table here, spread my papers in a chaos, left and right, and put up my yellow sheet. I have all my little nostrums on one piece of paper. They're right here. And I'm holding them up for you on YouTube and on Facebook. All the things I have to remember to say. Okay. Like, you know, local economy of free markets in Chattanooga and beyond. That's my little saying. Has been the same for 7 years as editor of Nooganomics.com. Nooganomics.com, the website for the man who matters. Not very popular, of course, because if you're writing for people who matter, you're always writing for and talking to a small group of people. And so I count that I'm a blessed man as a writer, the blogger with the biggest pen in Chattanooga, to have you, my listener, here at 92.7. If just for 5 minutes, that's all you really need. If you get 5 minutes of what we're reviewing today, rehearsing in the way of Chattanooga news, you will have your fill. And the rest is just, you know, the supplements, right? The rest is just supplements because, and you need the Tulisian supplements because we have soil depletion in the media, and the crops of press reports every day are depleted of essential minerals because of overuse and the prevalency of phosphates from the industrial sector spread across the land to feed the media. With me, though, you get organic. It's all organic and homegrown and provided by local farmers. And I do want you to take advantage of me here. Now, Alvin York is in my gun sight, if you will. There's a county commissioner, and I was in such a rush this morning, I couldn't get my act together to find the name of the commissioner. A former commissioner, if you call me with his name, if you would do that at 800-8949. Saudi Daisy, he runs an export business of signs, notices, billboards, small posters, and the name slips me. But I've been in there a couple of times, as a lot of people do, especially office seekers, who used to go to a former commissioner in his business for approval, right? Well, I've been in there for not really approval, but just to meet him. And on his wall, there's a series of rifles like those that Alvin York and his compatriots used to shoot in the mountains in north central Tennessee. And I'm looking on my computer for the name of the former county commissioner, but it's not coming up right now. But anyway, on that wall, and this gentleman let me take one down. It was very, very heavy. The barrel is unbelievably long, and very fixed sights, of course. And using weapons like that, Alvin York, a country bumpkin, at the turn of the century, learned the arts of shooting, also the arts of lovemaking. And the book by John Perry, I had a chance to distractedly reread parts of this morning, as I was going through the news and seeing how the Alvin York Center in his North Tennessee county, Fentress County, which is stricken today by an opioid crisis of remarkable proportions and huge unemployment. So there's a question about the school that he that he established there. His grandson is Gerald York. He's 70 years old, and the story picked up by Tom Humphrey, whose newsletter, by the way, I get by mail. Every story that Tom Humphrey posts or reposts with an outbound link to the source is very useful for me, the editor. I can know what's happening throughout the state. It's all there online, and I can scroll through his emails to hear about Fentress County. And the greatest battle that Alvin York fought was not against German infantry dug in along a scrubby hillsides in France, but keeping the school open, which finally he started in the late 1920s. And there was fire resistance to his government, a man who had a very spotty schooling, no more than the third grade. And finally it was given over to the state for care, and it receives about $2.3 million per year at the time when Governor Haslam, back in 2013, 4 years ago or 5 years ago, tried to shut off the York money to the York Institute, which is about $2 million a year. So the story by Tom Humphreys points to this conflict, and I guess the funding problems of that private school. York always cared about his people. He was a localist, and he cared about the people there. And in lovemaking, I'm referring to his courtship with Gracie, whose family was the neighbor, and whose dad said, "You will never, you will have nothing to do with that young man," because Alvin was a drinker, a swearer, and a fighter, and a dissolute young man. But he repented and found the gospel was preached to him faithfully, and he became a Christian. The story, now you, my listener, the guy listener, I think you'll really enjoy hearing about how these long guns worked, and how it is that he used a rifle considerably shorter than those on the wall of the former county commissioner's office, a very cluttered office. How he used those rifles to get a bead on German machine gunners and riflemen in a battle, the battle that made him so famous. He was a man who had an objection from the sixth commandment, which says "Thou shalt not kill." It's a commandment that is misread by some, but it doesn't say "Thou shalt not kill." It says "Thou shalt not murder." Killing is lawless, often, but sometimes killing is justified and it's lawful. For example, the execution of a murderer or a rapist or a kidnapper. That's a killing that's lawful and envisioned in the law of God as a proper response, a proper duty of the civil magistrate. But he was a man who was taught that meant you couldn't kill at all. And so, very serious and devout Christian, he said that was not something he could do. But he was slowly in long discussions with his minister, who handed him, by the way, the colored notice of inducement into the military prior to the American involvement. The minister was the postmaster as well there. He finally believed that he could serve in the military, and he did not have to take grave steps to get out. But the story on the front is that there was an advance that dropped hundreds of Americans from withering machine gun fire, and then there was a kind of a stalemate. And York and some of his men, he was not the top man, were stuck. They were surrounded in high areas by German riflemen and Spandau machine guns, water-cooled machine guns. And so the Germans were shooting at these men. There weren't many left. The commander had been killed. One man, field commander, was shot down. So many bullets hit him that they almost ripped his clothes off. Perry says, and then as the Germans were. There were some prisoners, and so to shoot at the Americans, the Germans had to kind of rise up above their emplacements to shoot over the heads of the crouching Germans who had been captured. And when they did that, York fired, and he dropped all of them, one by one with a rifle. And the training he had was in regular turkey shoots, regular shooting, competitive shooting among country people who would pay to shoot at a turkey or pay to shoot at some target, and the winner always took the kitty, which was either a cow or a part of a cow or a chicken. or not a chicken, but a bird. And so they would show up there, spend all day shooting at 40 or 50 yards. 50 men a day of country people would show up with their their long rifles and their powder horns and their pouches with lead and bullet moles and cotton wadding and percussion caps. And then some would drive turkeys and cattle, and they called them hog rifles. They were long, they were muzzle loaders, longer than a man, 15 pounds or more, very heavy. And then they would shoot, and they would the expression was that you titched the head of the turkey that popped up above the log, right? The turkeys were behind the log, and they were nibbling at the ground and raising their heads periodically or showing themselves. And when they showed themselves at that moment, you had, from some distance, you had just a tiny speck, and you had to hit it with a ball. And if you hit it, you would win. And so they had very careful aiming in the morning, getting the rifles just properly aimed, so you know exactly how to adjust for the wind and the temperature, all of which affect the trajectory of the ball. And so he had done that many times, and in fact he was judge of these contests, and he would know how to measure multiple balls coming in the same hole, which man won when he had multiple hits, either at a target or at an animal. He would be required sometimes to help out there. And so he picked off soldier after soldier, and perhaps the most exciting incident was when a German commander, I think his name is Vollmer, said, "Okay, we're going to have to charge this man. We're going to have to charge a German who had worked in Chicago before the war, and he spoke English." And so there was a charge. I hope I'm describing this correctly. A charge on York, and doing what he did when firing at birds. Birds, if their leader goes down, they all scatter. So what York did was fire. As the Germans charged at him, there were about 6 or 7 of them. He fired at the last man first. And so he fired, and the men in the front, of course, are coming across the rough ground toward his position. And at the last, he's down to his last bullet, and he fires at the man right in front of him who's not aware of his compatriots not being behind him anymore, right? But they're writhing on the ground, their rifles thrown aside and their helmets off their heads. The last man, two body lengths away from him, hit by the last bullet, thrown back and dead. And so in the end, there were a considerable number of dead men that York killed, not with a bad conscience, not thinking that he had taken them unlawfully, but that it was war and that it was his survival was important. And so he then gathered. Well, there were 20 bodies or so, and then about 130 men. They kept calling to them to surrender. You need to surrender. And the officers realized that there's a miracle shooter on the other side, and if we show ourselves, our heads will have a hole in them, in the side of our helmets. And so we're going to raise our hands and call comrade, and that's what happened there. And of course, that made him a great hero when the word got through. And he was so modest in his letter to Gracie. He barely mentioned that he had done anything worth noting. A very self-effacing man, Alvin York. He said, "There's no use of worrying about shells," he says in a diary he kept very studiously, "for you can't keep them from busting in your trench, nor you can't stop the rain or prevent a light from going up just as you are halfway over the parapet. So what is the use of worrying if you can't alter things? Just ask God to help you and accept them and make the best of them by the help of God. Yet some men do worry," he writes, "and by so doing, they effectually destroy their peace of mind without doing anyone any good." He was a very slow writer. He was quasi-literate, but he would spend many minutes in a single sentence, and he would labor over his writing. His handwriting was not neat. On April 23rd, 1918, he wrote Miss Gracie, whom he loved. He said, "So please answer them all and say, Miss Gracie, please answer as soon as you get this letter, for I want to hear from you once more before I sail ho, for I love you. So we'll only say, I mean by the grace of God to come back to you someday. And say, darling, I'm so glad to know that you have promised to be true to me until I get back. I sure will be true to you, darling. And if I should never get back to you, darling, you can say that your best lover and truest sweetheart is gone. But please remember, if you meet me there, you will have to get right with God. And he was very concerned as he grew as a Christian. He was more, and here now, his life in peril, or going to be in peril as he crossed over. He was concerned about her, that her heart was right. He says, "Oh, say, darling," in the same letter, "I can't never be satisfied as long as you are talking to the other boys. So please promise me that you will not go with one while I'm in France." Lowercase f for France. "Oh, say, darling, do you love me well enough to promise me that? I hope you do. For, darling, I love you so well that it almost breaks my heart to think of you going with some other one. Oh, say, darling, don't go with anyone, will you not? Please don't. And dear, if you love me, please take good care of yourself. Will you promise me that you will take good care of yourself?" Of course, that's he puts that in two words, not one word. And he goes on in another letter. He can't bear the thought of spending eternity without Gracie. And he tells of a dream that he had, that she had been saved at church and was holding a prayer meeting. And of course, he now, the man who had lagged, right, the man whose bride-to-be's father forbade any connection with the neighboring boy, one of many, many sons. And he says, "Yes, say, dear, you are on my mind every day and almost every hour. No matter how hot the battle gets, I never forget my little Gracie. I wonder if you think of me that way. I guess you do. Well, darling, I would give almost anything to see you. I'm sure that we could have a fine time together. But say, dear, I hope the time is not far off when we can meet and be together as long as life shall last. Oh, say, dear, won't that be a glorious time when we can meet to be together once more? Oh, say, dear, if I should not get back to you, I want you to meet me where we can live in peace and where no more tears will be shed and no more goodbyes to be said, but where all is peace and happiness and joy, and when parting comes no more. Oh, say, darling," this is Alvin York writing to his bride-to-be. "Oh, say, darling, what a wonderful time that will be. Will you meet me there? If we don't meet in this wonderful world anymore, but I hope to meet you by Thanksgiving Day or by Xmas anyway. Should I live, and I'm trusting in the Lord, and I know he is able to carry me through, and I believe with all my heart that I'm coming. So you may look for me, ho, ho." He often had ho, ho as one of his expressions in his letters. And it's very, in ways, disarming and disconcerting. He's saying something that's very deeply moving, and then he'll throw a ho, ho in there, and you just, John J. Hooker, the Democrat lawyer, was involved with Alvin J. York in his younger days, fighting the IRS. So Alvin York is a remarkable man, and there's a new story about him. As I think about great Christian people like that in our state, I wonder when we shall have a great man who can pick off the enemy that is the killer of children. Now, we are behind in Tennessee in one important area, and that is we do not have a candidate for governor who is pro-life. Now, they all say they're pro-life on the Republican side, but really none is. And this comes into view as I consider abolish abortion as a concept. It is a radical reform concept that we absolutely end the killing of children. 151 children in the last year for which stale data has been provided by the state of Tennessee. It's usually about 2.5 years old, as if somehow to make sure the formaldehyde fills all the numbers and eliminates the stench. The data is kept under wraps in the Department of Health for weeks and weeks and months, and for about 2 years. We get stale data every 2 years from the Department of Health. Governor Haslam's department. Pro-life legislation that we have here, even here in Tennessee, is not about abolition. It's about regulating murder. Why has abortion continued in Tennessee for 45 years, I wonder? Is it because the pro-life fundraising groups are not well funded enough? Well, the answer is no. Local pro-life funding groups take in, Tennessee pro-life groups take in millions of funding every year, $3 million in Wisconsin, according to one report. Is it because we don't have enough pro-life politicians in power? Well, we have pro-life candidates. We have a pro-life governor. We have who is a Presbyterian, as am I. We have a pro-life Herbert Slatery III, the Attorney General. Christian men, right? These are Christian men, and they're stuck in their ways. They're stuck in their ways, allowing for the destruction of children that the more fatuous among us would say were protected and their liberties enhanced by the work of Alvin J. York in America's imperial war in Europe and its imperial wars since World War I. We have a governor, we have a lieutenant governor, we have speakers of the House and other officials in the General Assembly who are pro-life. But what has happened? Well, nothing has happened. Do we not have the abolition of killing because we don't have enough pro-life regulations? Well, we have plenty of laws telling how and when and by whom babies may be destroyed. The pro-life movement has, for 45 years, attempted to regulate the slaughter of children as health care. It has nibbled around the edges of the Holocaust rather than treating abortion in Tennessee for what it is. And the biggest victims of abortion are black people. The black man, the African American, is the biggest victim of the baby killer in our state. Abortion is legal, and it's legal despite decades of pro-life work, right? Pro-life ministries, pro-life lobbies, pro-life organizations, all of them with in their ranks devout Christian people who want an end to the killing, but who have not pushed for it. We have not pushed for it. We are rather accommodating of it. These laws were never meant to abolish abortion. Pro-life laws regulate how babies are murdered and who is permitted to do it and under what conditions. They regulate how the corpses of murdered babies in Tennessee should be disposed of. They are, in essence, pro-choice laws. They make abortion more acceptable and more sanitized. They make it safer for mothers. And so we have in Tennessee, I'm not remembering the number right now, but it's 10,000. In heavily African American parts of the state, the abortion rate is astronomical compared to us. Chattanooga has a remarkably low rate of babies slaughtered per person in address. The data is collected by county, and 151 women residing in the county slaughtered their children in the latest year. And God's blessing has been that He has stayed the hand of despair in the hearts of these women, and only a few kill their babies every year. But there is still a blight on us. There is a blight on the state of Tennessee, which has not abolished this barbaric practice, destroying men and women, destroying boys and girls, and staying the hand of the sheriff. Sheriffs and chiefs of police around the state have protected the baby killers, protected them, protected their property, protected their corporations, and maintained their property rights so that they might more profitably destroy future men, future women in utero, defenseless boys and girls destroyed by approved people in our state. Well, this is David Tulis. Alvin York, as he likes to think, fought the Hun, and as they say, he fought for liberty. Well, he really didn't. He fought the Hun in an imperial war, but his spirit of fighting for the truth, I think, lives on in Tennessee among the hearts of some, maybe in your heart. David Tulis.
Traffic, news, and information. Nooga Radio, digital FM 95.3 HD4 and 90.